What joke could I make here that hasn't been made a million times already? So that's what the industry looks like now and who consumes its product. Now I want to know how the EU has impacted on all that. Joining me from Paris is John Litchfield, who has made the fishing industry a speciality, and with me in the studio is Dr. Jill Wakefield, an expert on the Common Fisheries Policy, or CFP, from the University of Warwick. John, how were EU quotas decided at the beginning after we had joined the European community?
I was actually there covering the negotiations in Brussels and finally in Luxembourg when it was all agreed in 1983. But essentially, the pattern that was established then remains the pattern now, which is that there would be an allowable catch. In other words, the sort of what the fishery was thought by scientists could sustain, decided every year, and that would be divided into national shares or quotas. And those quotas would be based on more or less the pattern of fisheries as it existed up till then, from the 70s up to that point in 83. The share out was obviously, political in very many ways. Some of the decisions made were probably wrong. I think the Scottish fleet, as I remember at the time, was quite happy with the share out, the English fleet much less so.
John, what nations were given what and why, if we dig down?
This is historic, so that the UK used to fish northern waters. It used to fish Norway and Icelandic waters. So to a degree, it had vacated the waters around its coast.
So let's get this right. We actually, rather than fishing in our own waters, we'd found it better to go up and fish in Norway and Iceland.
Yeah. Since the 14th century, actually, we'd been fishing up off Iceland and Norway. And there had been successive cod wars from that period right up until the 1970s. When the UK joined the European community, to its relief, really, because it was caught up in a cod war which had attracted the opprobrium of the world. And I think it was a relief for politicians to escape into the European community so that the community could then deal with it.
John, what do you make of that?
The British fleet was actually given a bit of a bonus because one of the arguments for the British had been we lost all our fisheries off Iceland and Norway already, and therefore we need to take more out of what would have been our waters had we not had to pool them with the EU. So there was a little extra given.
What did other nations think of what they got?
It came down, as I recollection, to a battle between the British and the French, as it so often does. One of the great misunderstandings and deliberate misunderstandings that's, I think, been encouraged in this whole debate is that somehow at that time in 83, we allowed the European boats into our waters, and ever since then they've been, using Boris Johnson's phrase, pinching our fish. But no, we used to fish right up to the Icelandic coast. The French boats have been going around the west of Scotland for centuries. They once fished right into the Thames estuary, which they're not allowed to now. So these waters were not national waters.
How was it decided who got what? I mean, you get a quota for the country, but then somebody's got to do the fishing and has got to get the quota. How does that work?
Between the 70s and the 80s, really, fishing communities were in decline and the fish weren't of much interest, I suppose, to Westminster. So most of the allocation went to Scotland, and the English missed out on that. But I think that they weren't interested. The government had said it wasn't going to do battles over fish. It had said it in the Cod War, and it said it subsequently when there were the negotiations over the settlements for the Common Fisheries Policy. It wasn't important enough.